Hello, I'm Jackie Barry, author of Experiential Speaking and a new book coming soon about online engagement called Unboring. I'm here today with Dr Penny Pullan, who is the renowned expert in virtual and hybrid leadership and has a best-selling book, Virtual Leadership, and indeed founded an annual summit on the topic. And she is also an expert in using visuals as part of the learning experience, and I think has a new book coming out too. Hello, Penny.
Hello. Yes, I do. I have a couple of books. So the one you mentioned, and then my latest book is called Making Workshops Work, Creative Collaboration for Our Time. So thank you so much, Jackie, for having me on your podcast. It's lovely to be with you.
And what's interesting is that for many people, we've had 18 months of having to work online because people haven't been able to travel the way they used to. And now we're moving to a more hybrid way of working where some people will be in the same room together and some will be
Mhm.
remote. But this isn't new to you, is it? You've been doing this for a long time. How did that all come about?
Yeah, it's been over 20 years because I was about to have my big break. I was going to be running the first ever program, not just a project, but a whole program of projects. And we were all due to gather in New York for 2 weeks, people from all around the world. The date on my ticket to fly from Heathrow to Newark was the 13th of September. 2001. And of course, I mean, I let it out, didn't I? The 11th of September tragedy happened 2 days beforehand. So we were not going anywhere. We instead we were grounded. We had to get this program kicked off completely virtually. This is 2001. There wasn't anything like Zoom. Certainly desktop video calling didn't really exist, or at least not in the big company I worked for at the time. And and it was like being a tiny baby thrown into the deep end. Would I sink or swim as a program manager doing things virtually? We couldn't travel anywhere for 3 months. Flights really were out. It was very different from the pandemic. But yeah, I seem to swim rather than sink, which is a good thing. And then I found other people were asking me, how do you do this virtual stuff? How do you work together so well virtually? And so I helped other people, and I wrote the first internal virtual working guide for people in Mars. This is in the early 2000s. And then eventually I set up on my own and carried on working with people, helping them with their virtual and hybrid leadership. So for me, hybrid had been when you had people, maybe you had part of the team in India, some of the team in the US, some in the UK, in different offices, some working from home. So you'd have some people in the room and other people joining from all over the place. So this is something I've been doing for over 20 years now.
And now you're helping other people to do it too, which is fantastic. What would you say then are the key similarities and differences between leading a team virtually and leading a team when everyone's in the same physical space?
I think it's a lot easier to get away with bad practice when you're all together. The things that I advocate for working virtually, which I would include hybrid in that, my definition of virtual is when at least one person is remote. So, what I suggest when working virtually is a very facilitative leadership style where the leader is focusing on getting the best out of each person in the group. When you have people who are distributed around, could be your locality, could be the world, it's not the same as everyone being in the office. Command and control does not work virtually. People tend to check out and get disengaged. I know you know all about people who find things boring or disengaging. So, really, virtually, what does work so well is when you facilitate, when you make it easy for everybody to do their own jobs really well. You give them the autonomy to do that. You measure them on outputs, not on inputs. How long has that person been sitting at that chair? Do you remember when people used to leave jackets on the backs of their chairs even when they went home? So people would think they were still around. I mean, it's nuts. So, those sort of things people could get away with when everyone was in the office. But when people are virtual, you really do need to manage well, you need to have more of a servant leader approach, a facilitator of people, encouraging, engaging, making sure everyone has what they need and that everyone can work at a time to suit them, and that you're not bringing everybody together for meetings all day long. So many people did that and got completely zoomed out when we went into lockdown. Think about how best to use asynchronous and synchronous working so that you can all do really well and be very productive.
I agree with you that this stuff is not new. And I remember actually before I set up as a freelancer 20 years ago, I was a senior manager in corporate life. And even then, I was on a project called Libra, which was all to do with work-life balance and all to do with measuring deliverables and not hours spent at a desk. It didn't really matter when someone did the work, where they were when they did the work, or even how they did the work, as long as they were able to produce whatever it was they were being paid to produce, which of course doesn't work for every sector or every type of job, but it does work for a lot of them.
Knowledge work, it definitely does. Yeah. So the great thing is, if you've been virtual for a long time and you're going back to working predominantly in the office with colleagues, learn the things that you take those things that you've learned back with you about being more facilitative, about giving people more autonomy. It's very motivating to have autonomy, but also support where they need it as well.
You mentioned earlier on Zoom is now one of the tools that many people have become familiar with, and it hasn't been around that long, although some of us were using it long before lockdown. And it seems there are new tools and new platforms and new apps coming along all the time. Which are your favourites at the moment?
Obviously video conferencing, and there's loads of them. I'm enjoying, as a facilitator, I'm enjoying Mural, and I know Miro is very similar. So being able to get people to use virtual sticky notes, to be able to vote, to do things very visually in a shared way is brilliant. Being able to get anonymous input. If you use a tool like Zoom and you use the chat, it generally says who has given whatever contribution. Whereas if you're doing something that's a little bit more tricky, a little bit more perhaps political or controversial, then being able to have anonymous input, especially if you have lots of hierarchy. And sometimes in some organizations, the person who's most senior, if they say something, then everybody else sort of lines up and agrees. Hopefully that's changing. But yeah, so you can do anonymous input very nicely. You can keep it very visual, which is good as well. So I like that. I also like wonder.me, where, I mean, there are many tools like this where you can actually go into a space and then you can move over just to talk one-on-one to particular people you'd like to talk to. Whereas if you just use things like Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever, then yes, you have breakout rooms, but you can't choose to go and have a chat with somebody or bring a few other people in, which is lovely.
Yes, there are more and more of these places where they're trying to emulate what we call real life, but actually being online, even if you're talking to someone through a screen, that's real life too.
We are in real life now. And the other thing that I like is something hardware, which I've been using for years, but it's a Wacom Intuos little tablet. It's not a tablet like the very expensive ones that have lots of software, and it's just hardware, and it replaces a mouse. It means that you can draw on the surface. So I use this in my, well, everywhere to scribble and draw on the screen.
You've been stressing that word visual a few times, and I mentioned it in the introduction as well, because I know it's one of your specialisms, and I know how well your audiences respond to it. So why do you think it's so important?
I started off realizing that visual wasn't just fun for me, but it was really helpful for the people involved and watching. When I did a webinar for the Association for Project Management years and years ago, and at the end of the webinar, the person who'd been hosting it for me said, "Penny, what on earth did you do?" I went, "What on earth did I do? Nothing special, really." And she said, "What happens is that the numbers go up quite, not everybody's there bang on time. So the numbers go up, and 5 minutes in, you've got up to a certain level. And then normally there's a sort of corresponding reduction of people on the webinar. But she said in mine, it went up to 205 quite quickly. And by the end, there were still 200. And she said she'd never, ever seen that before. So I thought, oh, this is interesting. And I asked people and thought about it and talked to people. And I realized that people had stayed on, not because my project management content is the most scintillating. Well, it probably is, but it's probably not the best project management content ever in the entire universe. But the thing was that I was drawing all the time. And visuals are appealing. They're one of the things that since then I've worked out really does engage people. But the other thing is that if people are drawing something and something new is popping up, you're not sure what it's going to be, there's novelty. And neuroscience tells us that novelty is so key. So people stay watching. Also, I use lots of stories and people listen to stories where we are, you know, for thousands and thousands of years useful information has been passed on through stories. So people will listen to the beginning and the middle and the end of a story. So you've got them right through to the end once you start a story. So yeah, those things really work. And with stories, you can add in visual aspects just by drawing a few things as you go along.
I'm a very visual copywriter, which you may know is my day job. I also train people how to write better. But I can't write without picturing how it's going to appear. And it's probably why in my training, I draw lots of things, which would have been with a big fat pen on a bit of flip chart paper. And now I'll do on a whiteboard or using annotation tools or something like that. But you're right, it just helps people stop staring at everyone in a little box, which is part of what I think is so fatiguing about it, and give them something else to look at, building on that added curiosity and everything else that you said. It just helps get the message into their brain, doesn't it? And that's the whole point of doing a session in the first place. Let's talk about your new book then, Making Workshops Work. And I'm guessing that using visual tools is one of the secrets that you share in there. Can you give us another one?
It's not so much something you can add, but it's something about how you build your workshops. Actually, think about workshops, not just, oh, we're going to have a workshop, but design your workshops. I actually use a visual tool for designing my workshops. I take a big piece of A3 paper, blank one, a bit like this one, and I will draw a large arrow, and that represents the workshop. I have the start time and the end time, and what the goal is by the point of the arrow, and then you can draw in breaks and so on. And I tend to put the contents in the workshop in on little sticky notes so I can move them around.
There's another word that comes up a lot these days, and that's the word hybrid, which I suspect is here to stay. So, Penny, what can you tell us about that?
Lots. I would define virtual as when at least one person isn't in the room with others. So hybrid is actually a special case of virtual. Most people think, oh, hybrid, that's leaving virtual behind, but it's not. So remember to keep all those good things you've learned about virtual leadership. Much of that will be incredibly helpful when you're hybrid as well. Think about the different types of hybrid. So hybrid might be, a hybrid meeting could be you have a room with people in it, and then you have individuals dialing in somehow, whether from a phone or tablet or a laptop, and they're joining in remotely. But it could be hybrid if you have, say, 3 or 4 different meeting rooms all connected into each other and no individual dialing in anywhere. And then, of course, you can have the most complicated hybrid where you have separate meeting rooms all connected and individuals dialing in. So it could be, quite complex.
You've described what hybrid working is. What are the biggest challenges then that leaders have to overcome?
There's one enormous challenge with hybrid, Jackie, and that is that you're not on a level playing field if you are in a hybrid meeting. So it's a little bit like, I don't normally talk about football, but it is a little bit like a football pitch, that's like this. So the team that are trying to score on the goal at the bottom of the slope, it's easy for them. Whatever they do, even if they miss something, the ball will carry on traveling in the direction of their goal end of the pitch. Whereas a poor team who are trying to score a goal this way, it's hard work. If they have to kick super hard, and if they even kick a little bit and it starts coming back, it'll go the opposite direction to what they want it to do. So it's like that. So we need to think about a hybrid team. How can we bring it down? How can we make it less asymmetrical? How can we make it fairer? And there are a few things you can do. So one thing that a lot of big companies are doing is saying, right, all meetings where people are in different places, we're always going to do them virtually. So even if you're in a meeting room with your colleagues, you're all going to dial in and sit there on Zoom or Teams or whatever it might be. So that's reducing the access of the in-person people. There are some other things you can do though. One of my clients does quite a clever thing, which is to create life-size cartoon cutouts of the people who are not in the room, and they prop them up on chairs, life-size, so you can actually see them, and that's just to remind them that those people are there. Really helpful. A few other things: have an in-room buddy for each person who's remote, and then they can just bounce ideas off somebody who's in the room and perhaps get them to ask a question for them. Just things that help make it less, less of a hard uphill struggle for those who are not in the room. Because obviously the people in the room have this very super rich level of connection and communication that you just can't equal virtually, although you can get quite close, but it's just not the same. You can't glance around and get a really good feeling for body language. You can't nip out in a break and have a chat over the water cooler or coffee machine. Those things aren't there for you. It's harder to pick up the dynamics and nuances of conversation when you are hybrid compared to those who are in the room.
Oh, some really good advice there. And you've just reminded me of a time I went out with a bunch of friends, and normally there would be all 8 of us together. And on this occasion, Sue couldn't join us. So we printed out her face, stuck it on cardboard and stuck it on a stick and took it with us to the table. And once we'd emptied the first bottle of wine, we stuck Sue on a stick in the empty bottle. And so she was with us in all the photos.
There is something very special about physical reminders of remote people.
When you talk about delivering visual elements to a presentation, one of the things that a lot of people struggle to draw is people. Have you got any advice that you can share about that?
Absolutely. I mean, people tend to draw stick people that look a little bit like this, and that's not an accurate representation of a person. The arms are normally, the shoulders are halfway down their body and their legs are way too short. So I have something which I suggest you do, which is also looks like a person and is easy and is fail safe as well. So grab a bit of paper and a pen or pencil or a screen you can use, anything like that, and just draw a few squiggles. How's that? A few squiggles. You can see they're not perfect. And these are representing the body of a person. And then if you put an oval on the top with a gap, you don't actually have to draw in the neck. Our brains are brilliant and will fill in the gaps. There you've got the head, and then just add in some legs. And arms. Now you can see these arms the shoulders are actually at the right place and the legs are about the right length. And if you have them in the proportion of 1, 2, 3, then that's a typical person. Although very few people actually are typical. I know my legs are short in relation to my body. I don't know about you, Jackie.
The other way around.
You can do all sorts of things. And you can even draw somebody riding a bicycle. So there's somebody sitting upright. Let's just add in the essence of a bicycle, which is some big wheels, handlebars. That's probably enough. And especially if underneath you write cyclist. There you are.
The power of adding the right caption to the right picture makes all the difference.
The power of words and graphics together. Incredible.
I'm not sure if it was from you or from someone else that I got the idea of squiggle people, but last year at the virtual PSA convention, I drew a squiggle me with a speech bubble saying, "Hello, I'm at the summit." And thanks to sharing that on Facebook, I actually won a power hour with one of the keynote speakers who said it had made me stand out from everybody else that had attended the event I got noticed, I got her attention, and it was absolutely worth it. So it is a really top tip, whether you're presenting or whether you're attending an event. How can people find out more about you, Penny?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty much the only Penny Pullan with an A. There are lots of Penny Pullans with an E, but Penny Pullan online. So you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And if you're interested, do connect. I don't connect to anyone, but just say you heard me on Jackie's experiential speaking podcast. And then I'll happily connect and answer questions and so on. You can find my company's website is makingprojectswork.co.uk, so you can find me there.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yes, and because what was I going to say?
Yeah, and
that was me making a sign to say it's going to be a caption at the foot of the screen.
Okay, brilliant.
Now, you mentioned your new book about making meetings work. I'm guessing that using visual
Making Workshops Work is the title.
Oh, let me say that again. On that very
Sun has collapsed. Sorry.
That was you throwing your book on the floor.